You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle and 24/7 Sports, powered, as you know, by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, as always, is my partner in crime. You know him, you love him, is your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, Von Miller is once again hosting his pass rushing summit, this time to take place in the fine and fair city of Las Vegas.
Yep, Von Miller is coming to Sin City. He's having his pass rushing summit at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas on June 1st. That's right in between when OTAs end for the Broncos on the 31st of May, and they have a mini camp on June 4th through 6th. So he's squeezing it in there. It's always a great event, Chad. It's a who's who of NFL legends and stars. It's a great thing that Von puts on, so I'm excited to see what happens from it.
It's funny because the fan in me, it's kind of irrational. But when he first started doing this, the fan in me was like, no, don't share your knowledge, dude. Like, don't give the opponents and whatnot like an edge. Don't share your knowledge.
Blueprint.
But in all honesty, it's actually a massive, I wouldn't necessarily say a boon to the Broncos, but it's a massive sign, overture, whatever you want to call it, that he is like upper-class NFL royalty. You know, it's the type of thing that the all-time greats do. You know, they want to share the wealth, they want to get together, they want to teach, they want to edify and uplift, including all of their, opponents and rivals across the NFL. So it's like the type of thing that, for example, Peyton Manning, you could imagine Peyton Manning do, bringing people together, even though he's probably too competitive to do that, for the NFL, let anyone in on his secrets. But he'll do it with the young kids in the Manning Passing Academy, of course.
Would he mentor them, Chad?
Ooh, that's a good question. And that kind of ties into what our conversation earlier this week about Joe Flacco not being, crazy about mentoring one Drew Lock, because Peyton Manning wasn't exactly the most passionate teacher for the likes of Jim Sorgi and Brock Osweiler.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to get that dig in there real quick. But in terms of the pass rushing summit, it's a good look that a Denver Bronco is hosting it, and it's a good look that a Denver Bronco is Von Miller, who's one of the best in the NFL and a future Hall of Famer. The only worry that I had when he started dealing with Chad was, I hope he doesn't get hurt. You hear about all these freak injuries. It's something that's not sanctioned by the team. The Chiefs did it with Patrick Mahomes. They had him stop playing pickup basketball games. As long as he doesn't get hurt, it's just a great look for the Broncos, and it's a fun event for NFL fans and players alike.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Hats off to Vaughn. Hopefully they can, being that it's in Vegas, they can, tear themselves away from the allure of the Strip, so to speak, the Las Vegas Strip, to focus on shop, and get that done. But we have a lot to get to today. We're going to go through, and we are going to critique and kind of offer our own thoughts on a way too early Denver Broncos 53-man roster prediction along with practice squad prediction. We're going to get to that here in just a minute. But before we do, guys, just a quick reminder, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. And then don't forget to leave your creative review and rate the show on iTunes. Zach and I appreciate that more than you could ever know. Give us that 5-star rating. All right, Zach, so here we are. I mean, OTAs are going on. The Broncos, not a lot going on, I guess, specifically on Wednesday. But even though there appears to be football activity going on in Dove Valley, I think you could agree with me here that just the last day or so has kind of been dead on the wire.
Yeah, I mean, the practices, there's 3 this week, only one's open to the media. So even though we have availability with press conferences, it's just radio silence right now at Dove Valley.
So once again, we're going into look-ahead mode, right? We're going into prediction mode. And what better way to do that than making a 53-man roster prediction? And our good buddy, Erick Trickel, who took some time off following the draft. He's a maniac, and he puts in ridiculous amounts of hours into scouting the NFL draft class each and every year. And with the draft being in the books a couple weeks back, he's taken some much-needed time to himself. But he returned with authority on Wednesday to drop a way too early 53-man roster prediction. So what Zach and I are going to do on the show for you guys today is we're going to go through Trickel's prediction and offer you our assessment, if we agree, if we disagree, if so where, and see kind of how this thing's shaping up. See who the front runners are. And believe it or not, even though it's just OTAs and we're nowhere near even to training camp yet in the preseason, there are front runners, right? We know who the shoe-ins are on both sides of the ball. But those fringe and bubble players, their front runners have already begun to emerge. So we're going to go through and dissect this. And Zach, we'll start with quarterbacks. Now, Trickel has, and here's the question, right? The Broncos, ever since they gave that money to Brett Rippon, and of course they re-signed Kevin Hogan before the draft, there's a lot of question as to whether or not the Broncos are planning on just rolling with 3 quarterbacks this year on the active roster. And it wouldn't be the first time if the Broncos were to do that under John Elway as a front office czar. But here's what Erick Trickel has. He's got the Broncos not carrying 3. They're going to only carry 2 in his estimation. And, of course, no surprise, it would be Joe Flacco and Drew Lock. Do you think he's wrong on that? Because to me, I still think, it depends on the roster math. We'll get to more of that here in just a minute. But I still think there's a better than average shot that Brett Rippon finds a way onto this practice squad.
I think he's assured of
excuse me, I'm sorry.
I think he's assured of a practice squad spot, but to get on the active roster, it would depend, of course, if they keep 3. I don't know. If they go 2, though, I definitely agree that barring anything unforeseen and Drew Lock just falling on his face here, he's not going to lose his competition to Kevin Hogan. So 2 quarterbacks on the active roster, I could see that. I would prefer 3, if only just to secure Rippon and not have another team steal him, just to have him on the roster for those kind of benefits. But if they only keep 2, I'm with Trickel here. It'll be Flacco and Lock.
Now, it's the early stages of OTAs, so take it kind of with a grain of salt. But the reviews so far on Brett Rippon have not been stunning. But this is one of those things where Rich Scangarello coveted Rippon in a sense for a reason. That 4-year starter, we heard him talk about that earlier this week, and they gave him that money for a reason. Now, maybe the whole point was to try and find a way to sneak him onto the active roster or the practice squad. Geez, I got that switched twice now. But if that's the case, though, they're going to have to hope that they either hide him in the preseason or that no other team suffers some kind of quarterback crisis and comes knocking.
Or he's just so bad in the preseason that no team wants him. I mean, that would be, I guess, a best-case scenario. Ultimately, though, as much as I would want 3, Chad, I think they'll go 2 just because they need that spot for another position like tight end or defensive line. And these 2 make the most sense here. As much as I like Rippon, he has some more work to do, and I think if they can sneak him onto the practice squad, they can still develop him there. So I think that's the best route to go. For
me, I can't quite disagree with Trickel, but I can't agree with him either. This is just one of those positions, and it won't be like this with every position we're going to talk about today. But this is one of those positions where for me, there's not quite yet anywhere near enough information with which to analyze and make a prediction. Let's go to the running backs, though. This one's a little bit more solid, and we're including here the fullback position. Trickel's got him carrying 4, to wit, Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, Devontae Booker, and, of course, Andy Janovich. Now, there are other guys vying for a roster spot, including undrafted rookies, Devontae Jackson, and also I'm not sure if he's an undrafted rookie this year or if he's going into his first year, Khalfani Muhammad. And then, of course, Andy Janovich has a little competition at fullback with the undrafted rookie from Pitt, George Aston, who's got like a massive moose neck. So 4 running backs, really 3 running backs plus a fullback. Depending on how the other roster math shakes out, this is one I think that is probably going to end up being right on the nuts.
Yeah, this is one of the easier ones to predict, Chad. Between the injuries and the well-rounded stable you have here and the production that you have here, it's a no-brainer. That's one of the best ground games in the NFL altogether with that fullback and Janovich. So I don't have any disagreement. They will carry these players onto the 53.
Now we start getting into more interesting territory here with the wide receiver position because on paper, on the surface, the Broncos have 4 guys that are, I think you could call them near locks to make, a couple of locks and then maybe 2 more near locks. And depending on whether or not, and Trickel writes this in the article, the Broncos choose to carry 5 or 6 wide receivers, will end up, shaping the intrigue surrounding this position. And a lot of that's going to have to do, of course, too, Zach, with who ends up kind of leading in the clubhouse for the returner position. But here's who Trickel has. First of all, he's got the Broncos carrying 6 wide receivers this season, and here's who he's got. Cortland Sutton, Emmanuel Sanders, Deshaun Hamilton, Tim Patrick. Those are the no-brainers. Followed by Brendan Langley and Juwan Winfrey, this year's 6th-round picks. So guys that are also pushing, if Trickel's prediction were to shake out correctly, River Craycraft would be on the outside looking in amongst other guys like Kelvin McKnight, who's also kind of an interesting dual guy that you could use as a receiver, but also, with some return ability.
I mean, I agree with everyone here. It's pretty much a no-brainer, but Brendan Langley, I know he's making this conversion and he has the speed and all, and he played wide receiver in the past, but I can't see him on the 53. I think there's going to be either a surprise here among the bunch. I do like Trinity Benson. If they want a pure burner, he might surprise in training camp. There's always that one guy. But they have that role covered to me between Sanders and Noah Fant. They have that burner, and they have the possession receivers. If they go 6, I can't agree on Langley at this point, but I do agree with the rest.
For what it's worth, Trickel says that he has picked up some information that the Broncos coaches so far have been pleased and impressed with Langley's transition to wide receivers. So I'm with you on this, that I can agree with 5 out of the 6. I'm not 100% sure yet, obviously, whether or not it's going to be 6 receivers and not 5. But if they do end up carrying 6, I'm with you on this, Zach, that I'm not sure Brendan Langley ends up being that guy. However, it does make a lot of sense because of, draft pedigree, and he's a guy that's got a lot of experience with the team. But at the same time, we flip that coin. John Elway cut him. Let's not forget, last summer.
And Carlos Henderson, who was a 3rd-round pick, so he has no problem giving up on high-round draft picks.
So the onus is on Langley to prove his worth, and if he's going full mode, I'm an offensive player, I'm a weapon, then he's really going to have to create additional value for himself as a returner. So This is one of those things, Zach, where if he impresses and handles his business as a receiver, and then also, I think, creates additional value by being a good returner, I could see this shaking out that way. But River Craycraft, is going to be hard to cut him. And Trinity Benson, Kelvin McKnight, those guys are going to push.
That's a great point. His clearest path to the roster is through special teams. If he locks down a returner spot, obviously he's locked into the roster as a receiver. But it's to me, it's just way too soon in the process.
Last thing on this same topic, not to beat it to death, but he'll still be able to be that gunner. There's value there too, right? If maybe he doesn't, lock down in one of the returner positions, he could still, and even if he does lock down a returner position, he could go on the field on punts and kickoffs and chase down the ball carrier. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, those bottom 2 spots on the depth chart, they're open for competition. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Now let's look at tight end. Trickel's got the Broncos, no surprise, carrying 4. Noah Fant, Jeff Heuerman, Jake Butt, and Troy Fumagalli. And I think, Zach, before I serve this over to you, this is assuming health. All of this, right? This is assuming guys like Emmanuel Sanders bounce back, Ronald Leary, who we'll talk about here in a minute, Jake Butt. Troy Fumagalli is basically healthy now, but Jake Butt's one of those guys that you have to question and kind of keep your fingers crossed and hope he can find a way to stay on the field with those, that additional procedure he had done when they scoped his knee to create those notches and open him up so there's not so much friction on his ACL.
Yeah, if they carry 2 quarterbacks, they can free up a spot where they carry 4 tight ends. And if they do, these are the shoo-ins, obviously. I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced they're going to carry 4 on the 53. It just seems like a lot. And you have your number 1 tight end in Fant, your 1st-round pick. You have a developmental guy in Fumagalli. You don't know what you have in Jake Butt. He's the wild card to me, Chad. 3 ACL tears. He has to show it to me first before he's locked into a roster spot. But if they do carry 4, obviously, these are the guys.
And that's fair. That's absolutely fair. The other thing to keep in mind with regard to the number of tight ends the Broncos end up carrying is that, again, you go back and watch any of the Niners film last year, obviously they use the tight end a lot between the 20s, but especially in the red zone. The one trend I picked up on very quickly is that they liked to use 2 tight end sets in the red zone. And so, if that's going to be one of your go-tos or one of your hits, you're going to want to have some bodies there on the depth chart. So this is one I think I'll on the surface, Zach, I'll agree with Trickel. Those 4 guys in that same number 4.
Yeah, I can't disagree. It's a well-rounded bunch. You have some pass catchers, you have some blockers, you have some inline guys. If they can all stay healthy, they can add another element to this offense with Joe Flacco.
Okay, here's where it gets more interesting. We get to the offensive line. Now, in the article, he has it broken down between offensive tackle and then, of course, interior. But I'm just going to go ahead and list the names. He's got the Broncos carrying 9. Garrett Bowles, Jawan James, and Jake Rogers are the tackle prospects, or tackle players, or whatever. Followed by the interior guys being Dalton Reisner, Ronald Leary, Connor McGovern, Elijah Wilkinson, Sam Jones, and Austin Schlottman. Now, there's no one really obvious that's kind of out in the cold on this particular projection, with the exception of course, and it's not, I actually edited this out of the article, but he had Nico Falah making the roster before he suffered that injury. So taking his place, Zach, is Austin Schlottman.
Yeah, I will agree that I think they're going to beef up on linemen on the roster, but between all the uncertainty and the injuries and all the new moving parts and Mike Munchak's recommendations, they will beef it up there. I don't know too much about Jake Rogers, though. That's the only question mark I have. The other guys are fine. The other guys are locks to me. But among the bunch, if there's a dark horse, I will side with Trickel and his scouting on Rogers and defer to that.
Yeah, the guys that are also pushing, I guess, that's going to compete for that swing tackle spot are guys like, who's he got here? He's got Quinn Bailey, I think. And the John Leglu, the undrafted rookie. So there's a few players in the battle, Bailey amongst them, who could make this interesting, but he likes Jake Rogers because here's why. He is a former 7th-round pick of the Falcons in 2015. And when that pick was made by the Falcons, Rich Scangarello was Atlanta's offensive quality control coach. And so since then, Rodgers has bounced around the NFL quite a bit. Denver's officially the 8th team he's been with, but he has a little bit of pedigree tying back in history with Scangarello, which might help him not only in terms of familiarity, at least with kind of coaching techniques, maybe. I mean, we don't know that for sure. We don't know how involved, after all, that Scangarello really was in coaching, but there's at least some familiarity there, which might give him a little bit of a leg up.
Yeah, and we know based on the draft that if Scangarello or Munchak, pounds the table for them, Elway will listen and keep him on the roster. So that's a good point.
All right, we still have the defense and the special teams to get to. We're also going to talk about the guys that Trickel has early earmarked for the practice squad. First, though, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, let's jump to the other side of the ball, starting with the defensive line. Eric's got him taking 6 players into the regular season. They are Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris, Adam Gotsis, Draymond Jones, Zach Kerr, and on the outside looking in is DeMarcus Walker. In his place, Deshaun Williams. Your thoughts?
I would personally carry DeMarcus Walker unless he just bombs in training camp or the preseason. I don't see how you give up on a second-round draft pick, regardless of the scheme fit, without seeing what he can truly do for 1 year at least under competent coaching. As much as Deshaun Williams, apparently there's someone in the organization that likes him, I would not cut DeMarcus Walker over him. The rest of the guys I'm good with, though.
It's going to be really interesting to see how Walker responds to Vic Fangio because, I think it's safe to say that he hasn't done well so far, and this is a little bit of an indictment on him under the coaching of Bill Collar. Now, Bill Collar, he's a very polarizing coach. His players, most of the time, they come around to love him. But especially off the bat, it's either love or hate with Bill Collar for his players. And I think the kind of living legend, mentality, a little bit of an entitlement attitude from DeMarcus Walker and it's just not quite jived with Bill Collar and his coaching. So hopefully, my hope is, the Broncos made a second-round pick investment in this kid. Right. I'm hoping that Vic Fangio can come in and salvage him through scheme. That's the only thing, salvage him through scheme, and then also just kind of a spiritual, emotional awakening and a reality check that, dude, you're only 2 years removed from being a second-round pick in the NFL, and the team that drafted you, you're literally in the conversation to be cut. Time to shape up and let's go. Because, Vic Fangio's scheme, it is more friendly to a kind of a weird tweener like DeMarcus Walker. He's going to find a place in this scheme. It's just a matter of, Zach, has he finally kind of grown up a little? Has he kind of focused himself between the years?
Even if you get just some third down quarterback pressure from him, that's production. That can register on the stat sheet. That can help the Broncos. But I mean, drafting Draymond Jones, who is a rich man's version of DeMarcus Walker, who fits the scheme better, that was kind of an indictment. If he flames out Walker and they cut him, I'd rather the Broncos just carry 5 defensive linemen and free up a roster spot elsewhere. All those guys are kind of interchangeable in Fangio's scheme. So that's one spot where I want to see things play out too.
Now, last year, the Broncos carried a whopping 6 inside linebackers on the active roster coming out of training camp. This year, he's got 6 outside linebackers, does Erick Trickel, with the Broncos carrying on the active roster. He's got the Broncos keeping Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Jeff Holland, and then asterisks next to the names of Justin Hollins and Dakota Watson because they can also, both of whom, play inside. And then the undrafted rookie, Malik Reed. Now, we'll get to the roster math. We might as well talk about it now. Off-ball linebacker, he's got the Broncos carrying only 3, which include Josie Jewell, Todd Davis, and Joseph Jones, the special teams maven. So in total, you're carrying 9 linebackers into the regular season, even though on the surface, Zach, 6 of those edge defenders, there's 6 edge defenders, but 2 of those guys can also, in theory, swap over and play a little off-ball if needed.
Yeah, I would not carry 6, and not these 6. I was not the biggest Dakota Watson fan, Chad, and I wasn't crazy about his, reacquirement to Denver. It just you can't carry 6 and then carry 3 pure inside linebackers because you're experimenting with Watson and Hollins, an inside linebacker. I just Malik Reed, to me, as the 6th guy, they just have an embarrassment of riches there. And I think between Miller and Chubb and Hollins, how many more do you need? I'd rather than put that spot elsewhere and hopefully, sneak it onto the practice squad. And Watson, to me, can play inside linebacker if he wants full-time. I just would even it out a little more. I would carry maybe 5 and 4, something like that.
I agree with that. I think Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Jeff Holland, Dakota Watson, even though he does have experience playing off-ball in Tampa Bay, it's been a lot of years since an NFL team played him there. I think the Broncos, just like in 2016, I think they envisioned Dakota Watson on the edge. So those are your 4 rotational outside linebackers. Then you get Justin Hollins, who can kind of switch between the 2. Hollins at least gives you 4 off-ball linebackers and an occasional edge rusher for depth. I'm with you on Malik Reed. I don't know. I guess we just got to see something from him. It's just too early in the process for you and I to have much of an evaluation on Malik Reed. But if he goes into the preseason and against second and third team offensive lines is just stacking up the sacks, then maybe it becomes a conversation. But I'm kind of with you where I see Reed as maybe in the best case scenario following a similar suit as Jeff Holland, where maybe he does well in the preseason, but not quite enough. The Broncos waive him, sign him to the practice squad, and then if there's a need late in the season, you call him up.
Yeah, that was exactly my point when you were describing Reed. Even if he has a good preseason, they just have too many bodies in front of him right now. And in terms of Hollins, I'm not even crazy about the Broncos splitting up his duties. I'd rather him just stick to one position than learn 2 and like the DeMarcus Walker thing. So I would much prefer him stick to one position, whether that be inside or outside, and just even out these the both spots. It's just too top-heavy at outside linebacker to me.
Let's look at cornerbacks. The Trickel here has the Broncos carrying 6, including Chris Harris, Bryce Callahan, Kareem Jackson, Isaac Yiadom, and then Devontae Bosby and Lyndon Stevens. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about Lyndon Stevens other than he is kind of he's got a little bit of experience in the NFL. Let me just put it that way. He's kind of a journeyman, fringe bubble guy, a futures guy, right? A kind of a perennial futures guy. But Trickel likes him, and he would see him there as opposed to Elijah Holder. Now, I think Holder, if as it stands currently in May, if you're looking at stock, so to speak, I think Holder probably has more stock right now than Lyndon Stevens, but there's still a lot of football left to be made or played.
Yeah, I'm with you. If they keep 6, I think Holder has the upper hand in that aspect. But, I mean, in Chris Harris Jr., Bryce Callahan, and Kareem Jackson, you have 3 good outside guys and 2 elite slot guys. And then you have Yiadom, and then you have Bosby. Again, how many more players you need at that spot? Ultimately, of course, Donatel will have his input there and Fangio. But I would prefer to keep 5. I don't know much about Lyndon Stevens. If he has a good preseason, maybe he'll sneak on there. It's just you have so many good players ahead of him, Chad.
For what it's worth, I've heard nothing but good things about Bosby so far in OTAs. That he's been playing in with the first team defense because of Chris Harris' absence, and he has looked the part thus far. It's looking like that those reps and that experience playing against not a necessarily elite level competition in the AAF, but that next level, better than in a lot of senses college, has helped to kind of hone his skill set. I'm really interested to see what he can bring to the table this year, Zach.
Yeah, and all the different, the scheme fits they have with the different things they can do moving around corners, and he was a ball hawk, which is what I liked, and that's what the Broncos need.
Yep.
They didn't have many turnovers, and they needed those generated from the secondary. So he's the sleeper here. I think he can hold down that dime spot, the number 5 spot, and you can do without adding a 6 onto the 53.
Safeties, he's got the Broncos keeping 4. One of the guys who's going to be on the outside looking in, the Broncos made an investment in, that's Sua Cravens. Trickel has him not making the active roster this year. He's got Justin Simmons, Will Parks, Jamal Carter, DeMonte Thomas as the 4 straight-up safeties. And, of course, we know Kareem Jackson's going to be playing a little safety too, but he's accounted for Jackson in the cornerback group.
Yeah, see, this is where I would take one corner away and just add another safety here. It's just they have so many, good prospects. I would keep Cravens on the roster. It's just another guy, barring his attitude, that I'd like to see thrive under Vic Fangio or potentially so, and playing that dime back role. I mean, they didn't draft a true safety. They didn't draft a true inside linebacker, and Sua Cravens can be those things for them. So if they want to keep all 5, I have no problem with that either.
I don't, as it stands in May, I'm not opposed to that either. But also, if you take away one of those corners and keep 5, maybe you can keep Brett Rippon and not risk him to the waiver wire.
That's true. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And then, of course, the 3 specialists, even though the Broncos are bringing a little competition in for a couple of these guys into training camp possibly this year, he's got, of course, Brandon McManus, Colby Wadman, and Casey Kreider as the specialists, Zach.
Yeah, these are pretty 3 locks here. I have a funny feeling Kreider's going to be replaced at some point. I don't know why. McMahon is going to make every player work for their spots here. No one's guaranteed anything, but I do have a feeling there's going to be a change there at the snapping spot with Kreider.
I think it's interesting that they've got Taylor Bertolet in there still pushing McManus.
Right.
And
for
McMahon,
a second time.
Yeah, and McMahon talked about one of the reasons why he's doing that, just because, maybe he's not planning on, really taking the spot from McManus this year. But if things go south, on like a mental level for McManus, he slumps in the middle of the season, at least McMahon and the Broncos know that there's a kicker out there that they have some experience with, who they're familiar with, they're comfortable with. They could call in kind of like Wadman did. Wadman was a back burner guy for McMahon last year too, after Marquette King, after things kind of hit the skids with him. And that's kind of the same thing they're doing here with Bertolet. He's a fail-safe. They're getting a look at him, see if they're comfortable with him. And that's only in the event, Zach, that things go sideways with McManus in the season. I don't expect there to really be any competition for McManus this summer. But it's the last summer, I think, that he's going to be given that kind of benefit of the doubt. If he doesn't crush it this year as a kicker, then I think the Broncos are going to really look hard at making some changes there.
Yeah, it's a great point. You always want to have a guy or two on speed dial, an emergency dial during the season, and Bertolet can be that. Maybe I'm completely wrong here. It's just a feeling I have, but I do think there's going to be a change sometime before year's end. And McMahon, he just has intimated that, Chad, in his press conferences, that he's not totally happy with this group. So if they keep struggling, I think he'll pound the table to Elway to make some moves.
Well, they signed that Bobenmoyer guy from Northern Colorado as a tryout player during rookie minicamp, but he was not one of the guys they chose to offer, a deal to come in as one of the 90 and go into the offseason program and come into camp. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong, but it doesn't sound like, if that's the case, they're kind of looking at guys that are on other rosters right now hoping they get cut.
Right. You never know. Yeah, he could be safe. They brought him back on that tender, but, like I said, McMahon is going to make him work for every single spot there, every single day.
Now, talking about projecting a way too early practice squad is not the sexiest topic, but it's still, it's worth a conversation while we finish up this episode of the Huddle Up podcast. Of course, 10 players can be carried on an NFL practice squad. Here's who Erick Trickel has the Broncos carrying in his way too early prediction. course, Brett Rippon, because he chose to keep only 2. River Craycraft. I'm not positive, though, that Craycraft has any practice squad eligibility left, but I'll trust Trickel on this. Trinity Benson, the undrafted rookie receiver. John Leglew, the offensive tackle. Quinn Bailey, offensive lineman. Ryan Crozier, who's more of a center, but also interior offensive lineman. Joe Deneen, a player that I think has a really good opportunity to make this active roster as one of the off-ball linebackers if he crushes training camp this year. But he's got him at least going on the practice squad, followed by Elijah Holder, the corner, Trey Johnson, the corner, and then Trey Marshall, the safety. And the last of them, Trey Marshall is a guy that I have maintained kind of a little bit of a, call it a fringe practice squad crush on. I like Trey Marshall. The opportunities we've gotten to see him play, I think he's done really well, and he's a former 5-star recruit, kind of flamed out. There were some health issues there for him at Florida State. Broncos signed him as an undrafted rookie last year, and the opportunities that he got, he looked good. It's just that the Broncos have a lot of similar kind of former undrafted guys with upside already ahead of him on the depth chart, Zach.
Well, Chad, let me say what an amazing looking practice squad this is. If this comes to fruition, there's just so much talent here. I would not be opposed to it. There's top to bottom. These are all players that would make sense. I happen to think, though, I'm with you. I think Rippon, Marshall, Deneen, these guys, some of these guys that he has listed on the practice squad, some of these guys will be on the 53, or at least a couple, at least 1 or 2. There's always that surprise in the summer. Last year was Philip Lindsay. There's going to be a playmaker here among the bunch. If it stands out like this, though, this is a long-term developmental lineup that you can really pull talent from. There's a lot of promise here.
Well, it will not be the last time we do a prediction for the 53, but, Zach, it's probably going to be maybe July, maybe when training camp kicks off is the soonest that our listeners can expect to hear us do another 53. And then, of course, guaranteed we'll do one before the final cuts take place at the end of August. But that'll do it for today's episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. As always, guys, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. Do not forget to leave your creative review and 5-star rating on iTunes. It's a huge help for Zach and I in terms of growing and helping us reach new listeners on iTunes. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter at Kelberman247, myself at Chad and Jensen. We will be back tomorrow with a VIP edition of the Mile High Mailbag, answering the questions of our great subscribers. Until then, for Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.